I think that success is feeling balance between joy or happiness and serenity. And I think also understanding, and I talk about this a lot, to be proud and confident of who we are and to understand that we still have room for growth and to continue to pursue growth.
Welcome to the Horizon Lab podcast. On this episode, we're featuring Lena Scullard. She is an expert at emotional intelligence, resilience, and leadership. Lena is the founder of LMS Productions, where she helps thought leaders across multiple different industries improve their mindset and their power to choose. So, without further ado, let's welcome Lena. Hey, Lena, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Austin.
How's it going today?
It's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. It's warm here in Minnesota, and I'm in a good mood.
Awesome. So let's kick things off. So what inspired you to dive into the world of speaking, training, and things around emotional intelligence? And how has your journey looked over the last couple of years?
I think my journey actually started way back in school. I was one of those theater nerds. I fell in love with theater. I loved performing. And I actually went to school and got a bachelor's degree in theater. And what I found when you study the theater, when you look at writing and acting and that storytelling aspect, it's really about embodying and trying to understand the perspectives and lived experiences of other people. So that was always a huge fascination for me, that psychology piece of what experiences and perspectives motivate people to behave the way they do and make the choices that they do. Now, I didn't know that it was called emotional intelligence back then. And I didn't know that I was going to have a lifelong career in it. Following college, I actually went through some very dark years where I struggled to find my footing professionally. And I'm not going to lie, I have one of those personalities that kind of makes me a drama queen. Okay. I can be a little impulsive. I can be a little overdramatic. And what I realized is there were a lot of things that I was doing to myself to get in my own way professionally. And when I found myself into teaching and corporate training, I got to certify and teach some cognitive behavioral development courses from some powerhouses like the Pacific Institute and Frankl. And things really started to click for me about where things had gone wrong in my life of my own making and where things could go right if I made good choices. I started to see how these programs and these processes, these thinking and thought processes were helping other people, not only professionally, but also personally, kind of navigate this complicated journey that we are all on called life. And when I saw the impact that it was having for me professionally, but also for the people that were going through these programs, I really decided that I needed to get these concepts out to as many people as possible. And that's when I started my own speaking and training business and have been doing that for the last 6 or 7 years, is really helping people understand the power that they have in their choices every day and the ripple effect that that creates and boomerangs back on us in the circumstances we create for ourselves.
So you mentioned that you were getting in your own way. What exactly were you doing to get in your own way?
I kind of fell into this victim mentality. I was raised to have so much belief in, my potential. And I actually talk about this word in one of my speeches, that word potential. I thought that if I went to school and did all the things right, that I was going to have this amazing career and this amazing life. And elder millennial, I got out of college. I sent out hundreds of cover letters and resumes, and 3 years went by and I had not received a single phone call or interview. I was still working in the frontline customer service job that I had started my freshman year of college, and I felt stuck. I got really depressed. I was pretty angry actually at how life was turning out in the world around me. And I kind of fell into this victim mentality. And then I surrounded myself with friends that had that same victim mentality. And I nearly destroyed my career just from having kind of that bad attitude and that poor outlook.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty powerful. So you mentioned the word potential and that you talk about it a lot. What does that word mean to you?
I hate the word potential. It's okay. And a lot of people do. When I say that I don't like the word potential, they kind of look at me. It's not so much the word itself, but it's the way we tend to define success and push people to achieve with this word potential. I just think about it for a minute. You have so much potential. What does that mean? How do I know how much potential I have? If I'm doing it, if I'm almost there, if I'm partway there, it's so vague. And to be honest, it's infinite. Everybody has an infinite amount of potential. And so the way that we use it to define success and push people to pursue achievement, I think leaves a lot of people feeling inadequate, like they don't measure up, like they're not doing enough. And that is one of the hardest lessons that I learned. I was placing so much of my self-value and purpose on extrinsic factors. I wanted people to like me. I wanted the spotlight. I wanted to see, the promotions and the salary increases, and all of my focus was on all of the things that were not happening for me. And through really strong servant leaders, they were able to help me see kind of where I was getting in my own way. And I found that when I started to focus on intrinsic motivators, just deciding what parts of me I'm the most proud of and how I want to show up and impact the world around me, my purpose, when I started to really pursue that and just care about the impact I was making and who I was as a person, that's really when my career started to take off.
It's really interesting how when people stop looking at the external for validation and for self-worth and they start looking internally, that's oftentimes when most people discover their dreams and their true passion, and where they see this kind of exponential growth that was always kind of there in the background, just out of reach, but they never really actualized it.
Yeah, we get so laser focused on that one thing that we don't see all of the other opportunities. And even coming out of college, wanting to be involved in theater and the arts, and that was the only thing I thought that was going to make me happy. I didn't realize that there were all of these other things around me that I was missing. And as soon as I started to notice those things and take advantage, I became an on-the-job trainer first, right? I started to raise my hand at work and say, how can I help other people learn and be confident in this job? And then I pursued a leadership position because I didn't like some of the leadership practices for some of those leaders. So I pursued leadership, and I learned as much as I could about that to be the best leader I could be. And it wasn't because I wanted the promotion or the paycheck, but because I discovered that I really wanted my purpose to be helping people learn and grow and be confident and capable.
Interesting. So how do you define success?
How do I define success? I think success for me is being able to lay my head down on the pillow at night and feel like I did all I could. Oh, this is reminding me of the quote from Jimmy Carter. To do all I can, where I'm at, whenever I can, to make a difference. I'm sure I messed up that quote, but it goes something like that. I think that success is feeling balance between joy or happiness and serenity. And I think also understanding, and I talk about this a lot, to be proud and confident of who we are, and to understand that we still have room for growth and to continue to pursue growth.
Interesting. Do you think that most people define success differently depending on the person? Yeah.
I do. I think that we're so programmed to create this list of achievement in our life, to get the degree or the certification, to win the award, to get the promotion, to climb the ladder, to buy the house, to drive the new car, to lose the weight. So many of those things are the things that I see people pursuing. And I think, again, it's resulting in feelings of undue pressure, inadequacy, damaged self-esteem, and honestly, in our society, crippling debt.
Yeah. Do you find that there's a toxic relationship with most people when it comes to their idea of success?
I don't want to pretend that I understand the thoughts or pursuits of most people, but I definitely see through my programs when people give feedback and respond and write to me and say, thank you so much thank you for helping me look at myself in a different way. I do see that there's a need. I don't know if I want to say that it's a majority, but I do know that there is a need.
Do you find people who have a toxic relationship with success may not know who they truly are yet?
Yes. I think when we spend so much of our precious resource that is our time and energy trying to focus on achieving extrinsic things, it doesn't afford us the time for self-reflection. and really getting to know ourselves. One of the first things that I learned to do on this journey, and it was one of the hardest things that I learned to do, and I can't even remember who gave me the advice. And this is, of course, way before we had smartphones and the internet in our pocket. But they said, Lena, I want you to start going to restaurants alone, not fast food joints or, cafeterias or buffet. I want you to go to a nice dining establishment alone, party of one, and just sit and be with yourself in your own company and learn to not worry about who's looking at you, who's wondering why you're alone. And it's harder now too, because then the rule would be not to get out your phone and spend all of your time on social media, right? But to just sit and be comfortable with yourself. And it was so hard for me to learn to do, but I'm so grateful that I can do it now. And sometimes I do it just to remind myself that I'm comfortable being me.
Yeah. You think it was a type of anxiety almost?
Absolutely. When you are kind of programmed to pay attention to what other people are saying and doing and thinking and how they're perceiving and how they're judging, there's definitely an anxiety that goes along with that. And I can tell you that since I've learned to not put value in those things, I feel the most peace and the most serenity that I ever have in my life.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. What are some exercises, besides sitting in a restaurant by yourself, that you think people could do to recreate that or to build that in themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of methods that you can use. I think at the core, it's finding moments to be alone with yourself in reflection. It is okay to talk to yourself. When you hear that voice in your head, you're not crazy. Most people have kind of that inner monologue. And if you learn to let that flag fly and have conversations with yourself, there's a lot that you can discover. In my Stitch It Up program, which is a mantra for building mental resilience, I really help people understand this kind of cognitive, right? It's thinking about our thoughts process. And I give them a set of kind of activities that they could do. For some people, it might be meditation. It might be sitting in a room alone in the darkness and just quieting the world around you, sitting with your thoughts. For some people, it's journaling. And there are a lot of thought leaders that will talk about the power of journaling. I have tried so many times in my life to start a journal, and I've never been able to stick with it.
Interesting.
For me, because I have pretty strong faith, for me, it's prayer. And it's not even necessarily down on my knees with my hands folded prayer, but I'm constantly having conversations with God about how I'm perceiving things, the outcomes that I want, that kind of spiritual guidance as I go about the world and my relationships. For some people, it's exercise, right? You go to the gym. Most people go to the gym, they put in earphones, they blast music, and they get a workout in. I would challenge people to shut off the music, go outside, go for a walk, go for a run alone, and spend that time with your thoughts. There's a lot of value in spending time with your thoughts.
I was having a podcast last week with a guy named Justin, and he's talking about something that Carl Jung talks about in some of his books, about separating the voice in your head, the ego self, from the self, that there's two versions of self. And he said that he was able to achieve a state of mind to where he could observe his thoughts from a third person point of view, to where his thoughts were no longer part of him, but just like an addition or something like that. Have you ever achieved that? And what are your thoughts on that concept?
I absolutely love that. And I'm very familiar with Jung, right? Studying different ways people think and perceive the world. I would say that when you get really comfortable having those conversations with yourself and being intimate with your thoughts, you can begin to kind of objectively understand where different thoughts come from, and then absolutely look at them almost, I don't want to call it from a scientific place, but definitely from an objective place where you can really start to question, where did this thought come from? Is it true? Is it a thought that is serving me well? Or is it a thought that I want to challenge? If I want to challenge that thought, what are my resources where I can go learn and understand more? So I don't know if that's the same as what your guest was describing, but definitely two sets of thoughts. And it's one of my favorite words is metacognition. And we're the only species that we know of that has this metacognition ability. And it's your ability to think about your thinking. And I do believe that there are two kinds of thoughts. You've got those subconscious thoughts that seemingly pop
Yes.
out of nowhere. And sometimes they're ugly, right? One of my dear speaking colleagues, Sindra Kamphoff, is a PhD, and she calls them ants, automatic negative thoughts. They're those thoughts that just kind of pop up. And so we all have ants in our head. But being able to recognize them and then bring that other voice out to say, whoa, where did that thought come from? How do I want to think differently? And being able to actually kind of dissect and question and challenge and understand is a really valuable practice.
Yeah, one thing I've been working on myself lately is noticing what external stimuli triggers a subconscious action or reaction, and how to swap out the stimuli or change the stimuli or change the reaction to be different. What do you think are some tips in order to do that, in order to better someone's routine or to remove negative, reactions to things in someone's life?
Yes. And I used to kind of be in that position where, because I was so naturally reactive and impulsive, and again, I kind of had to learn to really first recognize those feelings and emotions when they happen. I think for some people, that's the hardest part. We automatically go from the stimulus or the emotion to a reaction and never really give it a conscious, rational thought. So being able to recognize the triggers, I think, is essential. The hardest part, I think, is figuring out when to do it, especially if it's not a practice that you're used to. And I always use the metaphor of weightlifting. If I was going to go enter a weightlifting competition, I would not just enter it tomorrow and go try to lift the heaviest possible thing, right? I haven't trained for it. And anybody who's tried to get into shape knows that you have to kind of start small and then work your way up to the big stuff. So I will share with people those to pay attention to yourself, especially in the moments where you're alone and your reactions maybe don't create damage in your life or relationships. One of the best examples is just driving. And I still catch myself doing it all the time. Those little triggers of road rage where you go, come on, what are you doing? Are you turning? You're just going to cut me off, right? Like those moments in the car are really good starting points, is to just kind of pay attention to the stimulus that your senses are taking in and what things are causing emotions or negative thoughts. And then really spend some time thinking about, why did that make me so upset, right? And then I think a big part of emotional intelligence is being able to then, I think, acknowledge your own trigger, but then to stop and say, what might this other person be going through that caused them to do that? And I think when we can start to try to share perspectives with others, we might say, oh, maybe they're a new driver. Oh, maybe they've got kids in the back seat. Maybe they just had a really bad day. Maybe they're in a hurry. And we start to have a little bit of empathy.
Yeah.
But definitely with the triggers, starting with the small triggers and processing those helps train us for processing the big stuff.
Nice. So there's a statistic out there. I don't know where it came from, and I'm not exactly sure how much, so don't quote me on this at all. It's something like 80% of our life is led by subconscious actions, right? Do you believe that? And if so, if we're doing almost our entire day subconsciously, not really taking any conscious action, how then can somebody start changing their thinking in Spanish now? It happens to me sometimes. How does somebody change their sense of being if they want to become a different person? They have this strong impulse to do something differently in their life. How would somebody change that if 80-90% of their day is all subconscious?
Yeah, I'm going to say that I probably believe the statistic, but do I think that that is the way it has to be? Probably not. I really,
Okay.
truly, and I've found this through personal experience, that finding moments to slow down and really process what's going on in your world and how you're feeling about it and what the outcomes are that you'd like to see and what kind of changes and choices you can make to start to influence those outcomes. I really do think it becomes a habit, right? Our attitudes and our thoughts repeated become our impulses. So if we want to change our subconscious behavior, think about your brain, your subconscious brain, like a computer. And depending on how old you are, you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of input and output stored in your memory bank. to start to override that can't happen overnight, right? You start to replace those impulses kind of one file at a time, and that creates having to build new habits. And one of the things I help people with, especially in goal setting, is we want to change a behavior, and we go through all of this strategy to say, next time I'm going to do this, I'm going to behave this way. But we are driven by our thoughts. And so unless we change the mindset habit, behavior change has a hard time lasting. So we really have to pay attention to the subconscious and then find those opportunities where I can override it. And so I am a big believer in affirmations, right? So whatever that belief is that you want to have. So let me see if I can use an example here. If I have a subconscious habit of believing that my boss is not trustworthy and does not have my best interests at heart because I've had a string of other bosses that demonstrated the same, so I have a hard time trusting leadership, then that subconscious mindset is always going to impact my career success because I'm going to behave in certain circumstances as if I can't trust my boss. If I want to change that kind of subconscious thought or belief that I have based on my whole history of experience, it's a lot of data, right? Then I have to very consciously every day use affirmations to start to reprogram that thought. So our first thought is usually the negative thought, right? The one that isn't serving us well. And so if my first thought is, I can't trust her or I can't trust him, then I catch it and I replace it with the thought that I want to have, right? And so I catch myself saying, I can't trust them. I'm going to replace that thought. What do I want? I want to believe that my boss sees my value and does have my best interest at heart because I'm a valuable member of the team. So it's helpful to write that thought down, put it on a Post-it note, put it somewhere, and then repeat it often because our brains take in 11 million, I've looked this up, I use it in some of my talks. Our brains take in 11 million sensory signals per second and filter it down to about 50 of what we're actually aware of in our world. And what that means is that our brain filters the world into what it believes is the most important to us. That is why, for example, new mothers can sleep through car alarms and police sirens, yet the second that newborn baby wakes up in the next room in the middle of the night, that mom is awake. So our brains filter the world into what it believes is the most important. So if I go to work every day believing that I can't trust my leader and they don't have my best interest at heart, then my brain is filtering to prove me right. It's looking for all of the information it needs to support that belief. So if I want to start to live in a different world, then I have to retrain my brain to see the things that I know are out there. And maybe I don't see them yet because I haven't reprogrammed my filter. But by writing affirmations and telling ourselves those things that we want to see, that my boss has my best interest at heart, they believe that I'm valuable and respect me as a member of the team, and I can start to make that my thought, then my brain is going to start to look for all of the evidence that supports that thought. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. I do a lot of affirmations. I record voice notes for myself and listen to them every once in a while. That for me works good. I've tried writing them down. For me, I don't know, it doesn't quite work as well, I think. But I think to each his own, right?
You have to find what works for you. Again, same thing with the journaling, right? Like I tried so hard, it doesn't work for me, but at the foundation, it's the practice, finding a way to practice. So voice notes is an incredible idea.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were in theater. While you were in theater, were you able to, I guess this is more a question, do actors, when they act, do they feel the emotion they're trying to portray?
The great ones do. And I should correct, I'm very involved in community theater. I try to participate in at least one show every year, just because it fills my soul. But yes, as an actor, and it's not just about being able to put yourself in that person's shoes in the moment when you're live on a stage. That's a huge part of it, right? Because if you're able to think and feel as that person, then your actions and your behaviors can more authentically reflect what you're feeling in the story. But I also think a huge part of acting is the character preparation, where you really sit down and you study, who is this person? What makes them tick? What happened in their history that causes them to feel the way they feel and respond the way they respond?
Interesting. Do you find that body language changes the way that you feel emotions?
That's like a what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Right?
Our mindset definitely impacts our body language. And there are some very talented people who can use their body language beyond their mindset. They can almost trick you with their body language. But you're making me think, I'm going to say yes, in some circumstances, I do think body language can impact your thoughts and the way you feel. And I'll give you an example. A confidence coach once told me that the feeling of confidence does not come before the performance. You can be terrified and get out there and perform. But then the feeling of confidence comes after, when we sit down and think about what we just did. So I'm going to say yes, because if we can embody what confidence looks like in our body language and behave in that way, then the feeling of confidence comes later.
So, as a follow-up question, I have been practicing controlling my brain states with breathing. Do you think that body language is more effective or less effective than using breathing exercises to control your brain states and emotions?
I am going to say both and neither, because I really think our brain states and emotions are best manipulated with our conscious thoughts. So if you're someone who can think better when you are practicing those breathing techniques, then that's the better option. But if you are someone who needs to be moving and active, then I think that piece of it, whichever helps your conscious mind process.
Okay. So, I always end the podcast with a kind of fun question. So, if you could sit down with any historical figure and talk about emotional intelligence and mindset with that person, who would it be and what would be the first thing you ask them?
Okay, I get really torn on this question because there are two that come to mind, and I wrestle back and forth. The first for me that comes to mind in any context of this question is always Jesus. And
Okay.
whether you are someone of faith or spirituality or not, I think that Jesus, as he lived, had an incredible grasp on emotional intelligence and servant leadership and the way in which he role modeled thoughts and behavior that bring people peace. The other person, though, that I feel like in this context of specifically to sit down and talk about mindset and choices would have to be Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's one of the most impactful books, I think, that has shaped thought leadership around cognitive behavioral psychology for the last 50 years. And he specifically in that book talks about our greatest human freedom, a freedom that no one can take away in the worst of circumstances. And if you think about the concentration camps being the worst of circumstances, he lived this. He observed in himself and in the people around him that the difference between those who were resilient and fought through and survived and those that didn't is the fact that between stimulus, the things that happen to us, and response, the way we behave, we have a space. And that space is where we have that human freedom. And that's our freedom to choose. If we can't change the circumstance, then we can change the way we perceive and think about the circumstance. And that has always been very, very, very powerful to me. And I would love to just sit down with him and talk more about how he experienced that space and the choices that he wanted to make and the choices that he did make, the impulses that he felt versus the processing, and like how did his brain decide to do something different. That would be epic for me.
Wow, I didn't know. So if people wanted to reach out to you and work with you, where would they be able to find you?
Oh, goodness gracious. I am so lucky in that I am the only Lena Scullard on the internet. Until I say that, now someone's going to go like steal my identity or spook me or something. But you can find me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, a little bit on TikTok, but all of my handles are at Lena Scullard. I also have a website, lenascullard.com, and I would love to connect with anybody. My contact form is on my website too if you want to start an email chat as well. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Austin, it was so much fun to be here. Thank you for letting me passionately share a little bit about my journey and my passion for emotional intelligence. And I hope your listeners found something valuable.
Absolutely. Looking forward to having you again. Thank you.